Section 64 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ashley M. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 4, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 8, Chapter 16, Spheres of Action, Miscellaneous Business, Part 4. Insults to images. Allusion has already been made to the invasion of episcopal jurisdiction by the assumption of the Inquisition that outrages or insults offered to sacred images fell under its cognizance. For this there was more justification than for some other inferential heresies, for willful irreverence to the objects of universal cult was reasonably regarded as causing suspicion of erroneous belief, and during the period of active persecution of crypto-Judaism and of Protestantism, such offences were readily ascribable to heretical fanaticism. In one instance, at least, the secular magistrates exercised jurisdiction. In December 1643, Madrid was much excited by a robbery committed on a miracle-working image of Nuestra Señora de la Gracia, when all its jewels, ornaments, and vestments were taken, and worst of all, the image was left lying face downwards on the ground. Great efforts were made to detect the perpetrators of the sacrilege, and it was accounted miraculous when they were identified while investigating another robbery. They must have been tried by the criminal judges, for no mention is made of the Inquisition, and all three were hanged in March 1644 in presence of an immense crowd. This was exceptional, and the jurisdiction of the Inquisition was generally admitted. We are told, by a writer of the period, that, when images of the saints are outraged by word or act, if the accused belongs to a nation infected with iconoclastic heresy, and the evidence is sufficient and he denies intention, he must be tortured. Overcoming the torture, without having sufficiently purged the evidence, he can be sentenced to an extraordinary penalty and to abjuration, either de levi or de vehementi. If he confesses both fact and intention and begs for mercy, he is to be reconciled. But, if pertinacious, he must be relaxed. This, however, applies to cases of absolute heretics, in which the sacrilege was apt to be merely an aggravating incident, while the majority of cases consisted of more or less reckless Catholics, whose punishment varied with the circumstances and was rarely vindictive. In the Toledo tribunal, from 1575 to 1610, there were but 4 cases, which illustrate the general principles of treatment and the extreme susceptibility felt with regard to any irreverence towards sacred objects. The first of these occurs in 1579, when Francisco del Espinar, a boy of 13, was tried for pulling up a wayside cross, playing with it until he broke it, and cast the fragments into a vineyard, and then alleging that it was no sin because the cross was not a blessed one. He confessed freely and pleaded that it was not through irreverence, because he was drunk, but he was punished with 60 lashes and 2 years of exile. The second was in 1595, when Fernando Rodriguez was accused by 3 witnesses of throwing a stick at a paper image of the Virgin on an altar, tearing it and uttering a filthy jest, but he proved an alibi and the case was suspended. The next was in 1600, when Anton Ruiz Nieto was punished with abjuration de levi and 3 years exile, for maltreating a crucifix and using offensive words to it. The fourth, in 1606, illustrates the circumspection requisite to avoid even the appearance of irreverence, and the danger of denunciation which constantly impended over every one. Isabel de Espinosa was denounced by 3 witnesses because she had placed on a close stool, which she kept in her living room, a painted board on which were representations of Christ and some saints. A neighbor removed it, and she replaced it, when the neighbor spoke to her and she changed its place. She was brought from Ocaña to Toledo, and a house was assigned to her as a prison. In defense she explained that her mother-in-law had left her some old furniture, which her husband had just brought to the house. Among it was this board, black and indistinguishable by age, and, without examination, she had put it on the objectionable article, but when this was pointed out to her she had removed it. As she was a simple woman and there was no apparent malice, the case was suspended. In contrast with the severity of the secular courts, as manifested by the Madrid case of 1644 above referred to, and the French case of Chevalier de la Barre, the Inquisition was singularly merciful. In 1661, Francisco de Abiles, chief auditor of the Priors of St. John, for insults to an image of Christ, was only exiled for 2 years by the Toledo tribunal, which likewise, in 1689, merely exiled for 1 year Juan Martin Salvador for stabbing a cross. Perhaps the instance of the greatest rigor that I have met was that visited, in 1720, by the Madrid tribunal on a youth named Joseph de la Sierra. While confined in the royal prison, he became enraged in gambling and, in his wrath, he threw in the dirt a picture of the Virgin and tore up another, for which he was sentenced to 200 lashes, 5 years in the galleys, and 8 years of exiles from Madrid and his native province of Galicia. During the active period of the Inquisition, cases of this offense are singularly few. In all the 64 autos held in Spain, from 1721 to 1727, there is not a single specific instance serious enough to require appearance in an auto, indicating how universal and deep-seated was the popular reverence for sacred symbols. It is therefore significant of the spiritual and intellectual unrest characterizing the close of the century, that outrages on images become comparatively frequent. In the decades 1780 to 1789 inclusive, there were 16 cases. In that of 1790 to 1799, 33, and from 1800 to 1810, 19. Some of them, such as trampling on the cross, indicated of iconoclastic zeal. Under the Restoration, there are but 3 cases on record. During this period, the spirit of revolt manifested itself in other kindred ways. In 1797, 1798, 1799, 1800, and 1802, there were trials for throwing down and trampling on consecrated wafers. In 1797, in Valencia, Bernardo Amengail, Ignacio Sanchez, Miguel Escriva, and Valentin Duza were prosecuted for exhibitions burlesquing the saints and sacred objects. In 1799, at Seville, Manuel Mirasol was tried for sacrilegious assault on a priest carrying the sacrament to a sick man. In 1807, Dr. Vincent Peña, priest of Siquanz, was prosecuted in Cuenca for celebrating a burlesque mass of Don Escribo de la Monta for assisting him. These were surface indications of the hidden currents which were bearing Spain to new destinies, and it is worthy of note that they almost ceased during the brief years of the Inquisition under the Restoration. Akin to the function of preserving images from insult was the reverent care with which the Inquisition sought to protect the cross from accidental pollution. A Carta Accordia of September 20, 1629, instructs the tribunals to suppress the custom of painting or placing crosses in recesses of streets where 2 walls form an angle, or other unclean places. They are exposed to filth, while all existing ones are to be removed or erased under discretional penalties. Another Carta of April 19, 1689, recites that not only has this not been done, but that the custom of placing crosses in these objectionable places is extending, wherefore the previous orders are reissued, with notice that 6 days after publication will be allowed, subsequently to which the penalties will be enforced. Uncanonized saints. In the exuberant cult offered to saints, there must be some central and absolute authority to determine claims to sainthood and to preserve the faithful from the superstition of wasting devotion on those who have no power of suffrage. Saint Ulrich of Augsburg is said to be the first saint whose sanctity was deliberately passed upon by Rome in 993, and Alexander III in 1181 definitely forbade the adoration of those who had not been canonized by the Holy See. The assumption of such authority was essential, for the cult of a local saint was profitable to a shrine fortunate enough to possess its remains, and popular enthusiasm was ready at any moment to ascribe sainthood to any devotee who had earned the reputation of especial holiness. How difficult it was for even the Inquisition to crush this eagerness for new intercessors between God and man is seen in the disturbances which troubled Valencia for 7 years, between 1612 and 1619. After the death of Mosén Francisco Simon, a priest of holy life, there developed a fixed belief that he was a saint in heaven. Chapels and altars were dedicated to him. Books were printed filled with the miracles wrought by his intercession. His images were adorned with the nimbus of sanctity. Processions and illuminations were organized in his honor, and the question of his right to a place in the calendar became a political as well as a religious one. It was in vain that the Holy See asserted its unquestioned right of decision and ordered the Inquisition to suppress the superstition. Popular excitement reached such height that an attempt was made to murder in the pulpit a secretary of the tribunal, when he endeavored to read the edict. A priest named Ozar was slain for opposing the popular frenzy. And Archbishop Aliaga, for 6 years after his election in 1612, was unable to perform the visitation of his see, because he would everywhere have met with the unauthorized cults which he could not sanction by partaking. The Suprema did its best by continual consultas to Philip III, asking the aid of the secular arm in suppressing the schismatic devotion, and enable it to publish its condemnatory edicts. Its efforts were neutralized by the Council of Aragon, backed by the all-powerful favorite Lerma, whose marquisate of Denia led him to favor the Valencians. It was doubtless his disgrace in 1618 which enabled the Suprema to attain its purpose, when an energetic consulta of January 10, 1619, was returned with a decree in the royal autograph to the effect that, if certain 5 points that had been agreed upon were not executed within a month, the tribunal could be ordered to publish the edicts without further delay. In this case the Inquisition acted under special papal commands, but the growing abuse of the unauthorized cult and its supposititious saints led Urban VIII in 1634 to issue a general decree empowering bishops and inquisitors to repress, with penalties proportioned to the offense, all worship of saints and martyrs not pronounced as such by the Holy See, or relating their miracles in books, or representing them with the nimbus. Under this the Index of Sotomayor in 1640 and the subsequent ones ordered the suppression of all images or portraits adorned with the insignia of sanctity, unless the persons represented had been duly beatified or canonized by Rome. Yet they did not condemn a work issued in 1636 by a pious priest of Salamanca and Toledo, Francisco Miranda y Paz, urging the cult as the saints of Adam, the father of the human race, and audaciously asking whether this could not be done without the license of a Roman pontiff. In fact, what the Inquisition did in discharge of this duty is less significant than what it left undone. We have seen that the assumed martyrdom of El Santo Niño de la Guardia was followed by a popular cult of the unknown victim. That cult proved exceedingly lucrative to those who exploited it and has continued to the present day, although Rome could never be induced to sanction it. Yet the Inquisition prudently forbore to interfere with it in any way. Similar abstention was observed in the celebrated case of the forgeries known as the Plomos del Sacromonte, inscribed leaden plates accompanied by bones assumed to be those of the earliest Christian martyrs, exhumed in 1595 on a mountain near Granada. The forgeries were clumsy enough, but they favored the 2 points dearest to the Spanish heart, the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin and the Spanish apostolate of St. James. They were welcomed with the intensest fervor. A house of secular canons was erected on the spot, which grew wealthy through the offerings of pilgrims, and innumerable miracles attested the sanctity of the relics. Rome refused to admit the authenticity of the plomos without examining them. After a long struggle they were sent there in 1641. And after another protracted contest they were condemned as fabrications, May 6, 1682, by Innocent XI in a special brief. The bones of the so-called martyrs were not specifically condemned as spurious, but they were not accepted as genuine. Yet the Index of Vidal-Marin, while printing the condemnation of the plomos and of the books written in their defense, was careful to assert that the prohibition did not include the relics or the veneration paid to them. The Sacromonte is still a place of pilgrimage and, in the Plaza del Triunfo of Granada, there stands a pillar bearing the names and martyrdoms of the saints as recorded in the plomos. Yet, so long as the claims of the martyrs were not allowed by Rome, and the only evidence in their favor was condemned as fabricated, this was superstition, and its suppression was the duty of the Inquisition. While it was empowered to do this by the decree of Urban VIII, it is not easy to see whence Inquisitor General Ars y Reynoso obtained faculties to authorize the cult of supposititious saints not accepted by the Holy See. The success of the plomos led a learned Jesuit, Roman de la Higuera and his imitators to fabricate chronicles of early Christian times, principally designed to stimulate Mariolatry and belief in the Christianization of Spain by St. James. They were long accepted and genuine and, in 1650, Ars Iranoso ordered the fictitious saints and martyrs who figure in them to be included in litanies as objects of veneration and worship. Still, the Inquisition asserted to the last its authority under the decree of Urban VIII. So recently as 1818, Joseph de la Herrera, an apothecary in Xeres de la Frontera, desired to establish the cult of an engraving of the Trinity, copied from a picture venerated in the Cathedral of Mexico. The Tribunal of Seville prohibited the effort. End of section 64. Recording by Ashley M.